Elizabeth Henderson, known simply as Liz, sat on her worn, floral-patterned sofa, the springs beneath the faded upholstery groaning a familiar protest. The small two-bedroom ranch house, built in the 1950s, smelled faintly of old books and freshly brewed black coffee. It was a humble dwelling in a rapidly gentrifying area just outside of Seattle, a fact that her son, Gregory, and her daughter-in-law Chloe never failed to remind her of with thinly veiled disgust. To them, the house was a symbol of Liz's perceived poverty and lack of ambition. They believed Liz was a woman whose professional peak had been a low-level bookkeeping job, held just long enough to scrape by after her husband. George died 2 decades ago. The truth, a complicated, glittering tapestry woven with decades of deliberate silence and strategic investment, was a fortress Liz had built entirely around herself. Her husband, George, had been a kind man and a decent schoolteacher, but the financial empire Liz commanded had been forged entirely by her own sharp mind. She hadn't been a bookkeeper. She had been the silent, majority stakeholder and strategic advisor for a series of successful tech startups in the early days, selling off her shares at peak value and diversifying her portfolio with ruthless, almost frightening efficiency. The wealth was colossal, measured in 8 figures, carefully spread across offshore trusts, proprietary mutual funds, and, most ironically, the land on which this very shabby house sat, property that Chloe frequently mocked as a useless, oversized yard. Liz drove a 10-year-old Toyota Camry, bought her clothes from clearance racks, and cooked every meal from scratch, not because she had to, but because real power observes in silence, and Liz had observed Gregory and Chloe very closely for years. The phone rang, its jarring, modern chime shattering the peaceful mid-morning quiet. Liz didn't need to look at the caller ID. Only Chloe called at this hour, treating Liz's schedule with the casual disregard of a supervisor addressing a junior employee. "Hello, Chloe," Liz said, her voice soft, carrying the slight reedy quality that comes with age, which Chloe often mistook for weakness. "Oh, finally. Liz, I was starting to think you were out wandering aimlessly again." Chloe's voice crackled through the speaker. Sharp, impatient, and unnecessarily loud. "Listen, I'm calling about Saturday. Greg and I are hosting the annual Founders Mixer. You know, the big one where all the key partners show up. And we need the extra folding chairs." Liz paused, rubbing a spot on the worn leather arm of the sofa. The chairs were cheap, functional metal folding chairs, relics from Greg's high school graduation party 15 years ago. They were also the most comfortable, practical chairs the couple had ever owned, which was why Chloe kept borrowing them. "Chloe, you took the last 4 sets just 2 weeks ago for your garden party," Liz stated, her tone factual, not accusatory. "Yes. Well, we need more now. And honestly, they look awful next to our new restoration hardware dining set. But it's an emergency. You can just drop them off Friday morning. And Liz, please don't come in that awful purple coat. You know the one. It smells like mothballs. And you look like a character from a children's book. Just bring the chairs and wait outside. We'll grab them from the trunk." The casual command, the public humiliation masked as a favor, was a familiar sting. It wasn't about the chairs. It was about defining the dynamic. Liz was the servant, the resource, the easily discardable embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Chloe," Liz said, and she allowed a slight tremor of practiced frailty to enter her voice. "I can't, my back is acting up again. Moving those metal chairs is simply out of the question." Silence stretched on the line, tense and brittle. Liz could practically hear Chloe's jaw clenching, the mental calculation of how to pivot the manipulation. Fine. We'll send Greg. He's going to be furious, you know. He has to prepare his presentation, but whatever. He'll come over after work tomorrow," Chloe huffed. "And speaking of money, did you remember to transfer the $500 for the water bill? Our account is negative right now, and the penalty fees are outrageous. We really need you to be more prompt with your contributions. Liz, it's ridiculous that we have to keep chasing you for these small amounts." The contributions were a monthly allowance Liz had agreed to pay when they convinced her they were struggling, a self-imposed, deliberate mechanism to maintain the facade of dependence. Liz knew they used the money not for bills, but to cover the minimum payment on Chloe's designer handbags and Greg's obsession with expensive but unnecessary tech gadgets. "The transfer should be pending," Liz lied smoothly. My old bank sometimes takes a day or two to process. Just check on Friday. Ugh, this bank of yours is a joke. You really need to upgrade, Liz. It's embarrassing, Chloe scoffed. Anyway, just have the chairs ready for Greg. Don't make him wait. We're already under enough stress. She hung up without saying goodbye. Liz slowly lowered the phone to the table, her hand steady. She did not feel anger, not the hot, blinding kind. She felt a cold, surgical determination. The constant, calculated disrespect had ceased to be a dull nuisance. It was now a clear, unmistakable call to action. He has to prepare his presentation, Chloe had said. Liz knew Greg's presentation was the final, desperate plea he would make to his in-laws, hoping to secure a substantial loan or, more likely, a full bailout for their rapidly accumulating debts. They lived a life predicated on a fictional future, spending money they didn't have to impress people who didn't care. Liz stood up and walked into her small, brightly lit kitchen. She opened the pantry, not for food, but for the small fireproof safe hidden behind a stack of dusty canning jars. Inside, nestled beneath her genuine, original 1968 passport, was a sleek, silver satellite phone, a device for communication that bypassed standard networks, used only for the most sensitive, high-level business. She retrieved the phone and placed it gently on the small, scratched oak table. She didn't need a number. She knew it by heart. It belonged to Michael Chen, her chief investment strategist and personal counsel for the last 30 years, a man who believed Liz Henderson was the most astute, frighteningly intelligent woman he had ever met. As she dialed the sequence, her eyes drifted to a framed photograph on the counter, a picture of Greg at 10 years old, gap-toothed, muddy, and beaming with genuine, innocent joy. The memory was sharp, painful. The boy in that picture was gone, consumed by the ambition and avarice of the woman he had chosen to marry. Liz knew the core of her son was still decent, but he was weak, a willing victim to Chloe's manipulations, and perhaps the only way to save him was to utterly dismantle the world Chloe had built around him. The phone connected. Chen speaking, came the crisp, professional voice on the other end. "Michael, it's Liz," she said, her voice now transformed, losing all trace of the reedy softness, becoming low, resonant, and commandingly efficient. It was the voice that had commanded boardrooms and dictated global contracts. "Liz, a surprise. I was about to call you regarding the new German fund. Everything is performing beautifully, by the way. What can I do for you? I need a complete forensic audit, Michael." "Start immediately," Liz instructed, walking to the window and looking out at the meticulously maintained, yet structurally fragile home of her son and daughter-in-law 2 blocks away. "Forensic? Of whom, if I may ask?" "Gregory Henderson and Chloe Henderson. Every asset, every liability, every credit card statement, every lien, every overdue invoice, and every single communication with their mortgage lender and the state treasury from the last 5 years," Liz specified, her eyes narrowing. "I need their financial nakedness on my desk by tomorrow evening." "That is a significant request, Liz. It will require some maneuvering, but it is certainly doable. May I ask the purpose? Are we initiating a tax review?" Michael asked, a hint of excitement now in his voice. "No," Liz stated flatly, a faint, chilling smile touching the corner of her lips. "We are initiating a clean sweep." "Understood," Michael replied, instantly recognizing the gravity in her tone. "I will activate the necessary resources immediately. Consider it done. Anything else?" "One last thing, Michael. I need you to arrange a very public, very visible appearance for me. A corporate dinner, a black tie event, something undeniable. The kind of event where people are photographed and news is made. I need it for the night of the Founders Mixer, and I need a suitable escort." "A public appearance? After 20 years of complete operational silence? Liz, this is unprecedented. It will cause a considerable stir." "Let it stir," Liz replied, disconnecting the call before he could press further. She placed the satellite phone back in the safe. The game was now officially underway. For years, she had played the role of the impoverished, easily dismissible mother. Now, it was time to drop the curtain on the performance and let the true power of Elizabeth Henderson step onto the stage. Greg would come tomorrow for the chairs, completely unaware that his mother had just pulled the first thread on the unraveling of his entire precarious life. Liz knew she wouldn't just be giving them the $500. She was about to give them a lesson in true generational wealth, a lesson in dignity, and a lesson in the quiet reckoning. The simplicity of her life had served its purpose. Now, the weight of her true identity was about to crash down on them, and the foundation of their arrogance would not survive the impact. Gregory Henderson arrived at his mother's small, unpretentious house the next afternoon, exactly at 5:15 p.m., 15 minutes later than the time Chloe had grudgingly allotted him. He pulled his leased Audi Q5, a vehicle far beyond his means, into the short, cracked driveway, the immaculate shine of the car contrasting sharply with the faded, moss-covered shingles of the old ranch house. He didn't bother to turn off the engine. His intention was clearly to complete his chore and leave as quickly as possible. He was wearing his business casual armor, a tightly fitted light blue button-down shirt that emphasized his slightly too soft midsection, and dark chinos. He looked less like an executive and more like a man perpetually stressed by the appearance he felt obliged to maintain. Liz met him at the kitchen door, which opened onto the small, sun-drenched backyard that Chloe derisively referred to as the neglected lot. Liz wore a loose-fitting gray cardigan over a simple denim dress, her silver hair pulled back in a neat, unassuming bun. She looked every bit the struggling, dutiful septuagenarian. "Hi, Mom," Greg said, his greeting clipped and devoid of real warmth. He didn't lean in for a hug, instead offering a quick, impatient peck on her cheek. "The chairs. Chloe says there are 9 of them. Are they stacked up yet? I'm on a tight schedule. I have that presentation to finalize tonight, and I can't be late for the gym, you know. I'm trying to cut down before the mixer." Liz stepped aside, motioning toward the small storage area off the mudroom. "Hello, Gregory. Yes, they're stacked by the door. 9 chairs, freshly wiped down, just as Chloe requested." Greg immediately walked past her, his irritation palpable. The metal folding chairs were heavier than he anticipated, and the plastic floor caps scraped loudly against the linoleum, a sound that made him wince in annoyance. "Couldn't you have moved these closer to the door, Mom? My back is killing me," he complained, his voice rising with a familiar note of grievance. "I swear, every time I come here it's always for some kind of manual labor." Liz watched him heave the stack, his face flushing slightly with the effort. "I told Chloe my back was bothering me, dear. That's why she asked you to come instead, isn't it?" She replied gently, leaning against the door frame, a picture of frail helplessness. "Yeah, well, she was not happy about it," Greg grumbled, dragging the chairs out to his trunk. "She says you need to start anticipating our needs better. This founder's mixer is a huge deal, Mom. If I can nail this presentation, we might finally get the seed funding to pivot our strategy. We've been burning through cash, and you know how tight things are. That $500 you give us barely covers the utility fees in the guest wing. Honestly, living this far beneath your means is starting to become a liability for us, socially." He spoke of selling her house with the same casual ease he might use to suggest changing a brand of coffee. He saw the house as a financial relic, unaware that the title was held by the very same complex holding company that managed her multi-million-dollar portfolio. "And what about you, Gregory? You need the money from the house sale, don't you?" Liz asked, her eyes meeting his. Her gaze was soft but unsettlingly direct. Greg stammered slightly, caught off guard by her candor. "Well, not need, Mom, but it would be a huge help. It would allow us to settle a few bridge loans, and then Chloe and I could focus on our real investments without the stress. It's what Dad would have wanted, Mom, for you to simplify." Simplify. The word tasted like ash in Liz's mouth. It was the constant refrain of their entitlement, a euphemism for liquidating her assets for their immediate consumption. "I'll think about it." "Gregory," Liz said, giving him a small, reassuring smile that instantly placated him. That was the trick, appearing agreeable, avoiding conflict, and pretending to be overwhelmed by his logic. "Good. That's all I ask," he replied, already feeling successful. He straightened his shirt. "Okay, I really have to run. Don't forget about the $500 transfer for the water bill. And try to get some rest, Mom. You look tired." He got into his car and sped off without a backward glance. Liz stood in the empty driveway until the sound of the Audi faded. Then she turned and walked back inside. She didn't return to the sofa. She went straight to the small, dark home office her husband George had used for grading papers, now modernized with a secure fiber optic connection that rivaled anything on Wall Street. Her chief investment strategist, Michael Chen, was waiting for her on a secure video line, projected onto a hidden screen behind a pull-down map of the world. Michael, impeccably dressed even through the video feed, looked grim. "Liz, the audit is complete," Michael said, bypassing all small talk. "It's worse than we thought. Significantly worse." "Give me the highlights, Michael." Gregory and Chloe Henderson have been operating at an unsustainable deficit for over 3 years. Their assets are entirely superficial. A highly mortgaged house, a third mortgage was taken out 6 months ago, and their cars are both leased. The business Greg claims to be running exists largely on paper. It's a shell corporation with zero demonstrable revenue. Chloe's boutique consulting firm is under investigation for a series of outstanding vendor payments. Total consumer debt, including revolving credit and private loans, stands at $485,000. Liz felt a deep, cold ache, not for the money, but for the profound dishonesty and fragility of her son's life. "The money they demand from me, the $500 a month, it's being used exclusively to service the interest on 2 specific high APR credit cards, Liz. They are using your funds to keep the debt collectors at bay, not the utility company. They are weeks away from defaulting on that third mortgage. The house will enter foreclosure by next month if they don't secure a major influx of cash." "And the founder's mixer on Saturday?" Michael's expression tightened. "That is their Hail Mary, Liz. Chloe's parents are not attending, but they have promised to introduce Greg to 2 significant venture capitalists, Mr. Alistair Cross and Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Cross is a hardball player. Vance is his primary backer. If Greg's presentation fails, they have exhausted their last high-value contacts. The debt will close in." Liz closed her eyes briefly, processing the calculated, desperate web of lies her son and daughter-in-law had constructed. They were not just wasteful. They were fraudulent, betting on her demise or the forced sale of her property to save their sinking ship. "Thank you, Michael. The information is illuminating. Now, let's move on to my appearance on Saturday. Have you secured the event?" "I have. It was surprisingly easy, given your previous absence. You are an invited, highly anticipated keynote speaker at the Pacific Northwest Investment Gala, which happens to be taking place at the Columbia Tower Club, on the same night as their mixer. It's the event of the season, Liz, honoring the silent titans of tech investment. Your name on the roster alone will cause a sensation in the financial press." Liz smiled. A genuine, focused smile that completely erased the image of the frail old woman. "Excellent. And my escort? He is waiting to hear from you. Mr. Ethan Hale, your security consultant. He will drive you, attend to your needs, and most importantly, ensure your entry is appropriately dramatic. He is also fluent in the necessary protocols for a red carpet arrival. I took the liberty of coordinating with your personal stylist, Ms. Viviana Rossi, who will be at your home tomorrow afternoon to handle the transformation. She has strict instructions to prioritize power and undeniable wealth over mere elegance." "Perfect. Michael, here is the final instruction," Liz said, leaning toward the camera. "I need you to contact the organizers of the Founders Mixer, discreetly. You will let them know that Mr. Cross and Mrs. Vance will no longer be attending their small suburban gathering. Instead, inform them that both investors have accepted a last-minute, non-negotiable invitation to attend the Pacific Northwest Investment Gala. Make it sound like an unmissable, professional upgrade." Michael Chen looked stunned. "Liz, you're not just going to overshadow them. You're going to empty the room they need to survive." "I am removing the lifeline, Michael. Chloe and Greg need to feel the full weight of their consequences without external interference," Liz clarified. "Their humiliation must be complete, but it must be their own doing, not mine. I am merely adjusting the social gravity of the region. Consider it done, Liz. I will personally manage the reassignment of those investors. Their mixer is officially dead in the water." Liz ended the call and sat back in the chair, running a hand over the smooth, worn wood of the desk. The transformation planned for tomorrow was more than just a change of clothes. It was the shedding of a meticulously crafted persona. For 20 years, she had worn the cloak of quiet poverty to shield her son from the opportunists she knew would inevitably circle the family wealth. But in doing so, she had created the perfect environment for the most dangerous opportunist of all, the one who lived in his own house, his own wife. Liz pulled out her simple wallet, the one she intentionally kept thin and old, and retrieved the 3 $20 bills and 7 ones inside. She pulled out her phone, opened her secure banking app, and with a single, quick motion, transferred $485,000, the exact sum of Greg and Chloe's accumulated consumer debt, into a newly established, anonymous escrow account under her sole control. She looked at the sum, a mere flicker in her overall balance. "You said you want to simplify, Gregory?" She thought, a new sharp light in her eyes. "I am simplifying your life, starting with the burden of your debt, but not in the way you think." On Saturday, when Greg and Chloe realized that their key investors were missing and their financial future was collapsing, Liz would finally reveal the true cost of their arrogance. She was not a struggling mother looking for a condo. She was the woman who built the tower they sought to climb, and she was about to pull the rug out from under their feet, making them fall exactly 485,000 reasons deep. The stage was set, the audience was distracted, and the star was about to make her grand, unexpected entrance. The following day, a Friday, felt to Liz like the calm, deep breath before a storm. The house, usually a silent, dusty testament to her assumed modesty, became a hive of discreet, high-end activity. Viviana Rossi, Liz's personal stylist, a formidable woman with an impressive clientele, arrived with her small team. They swept into the small ranch house with the precision of a military unit, transforming the living room into a temporary salon and the guest bedroom into a dressing area. Viviana was blunt and professional. "Liz, you've been hiding under burlap for 2 decades. It's an artistic choice, certainly, but frankly, it's a waste of raw material. We're not aiming for elegant. We're aiming for indisputable capital." The process was thorough and focused on emphasizing the sharp, intelligent woman Liz truly was. Her hair, the simple silver bun Greg found so tired, was released, treated, and styled into a sleek, voluminous silver bob that framed her strong jawline. Her simple wire-rimmed reading glasses were replaced by a subtly tinted, modern frame, which, combined with professional makeup that enhanced her striking blue eyes, gave her a look of formidable intellectual clarity. "The dress is the final piece," Viviana announced, presenting a garment bag with the reverence of a museum curator. Inside was a custom-tailored gown, not glittering or excessively ornate, but crafted from a heavy, midnight blue silk velvet that seemed to absorb the light. It featured a high, structured neckline and long sleeves, exuding an authority that screamed high-level negotiation, not frivolous party attire. Liz stepped into the dress, and the change was instantaneous. The soft, frail posture of the aging mother vanished, replaced by the upright, commanding stance of a corporate matriarch. The silk draped perfectly, emphasizing a slender power that age had refined, not diminished. Viviana nodded, satisfied. "Perfect. This isn't fashion, Liz. This is a balance sheet in fabric." Finally, the jewelry. Liz never wore the pieces she truly owned. Her father's simple wedding band, a few costume pieces bought at yard sales for the act. But tonight she needed a statement of irrevocable, quiet wealth. Viviana placed a single piece on her neck. A pendant featuring a brilliant, flawless emerald, bordered by small cushion-cut diamonds. The piece was antique, subtle in its setting, but the quality of the stone was so high it drew the eye immediately. "The emerald is from your private collection, yes?" Viviana asked, confirming the provenance of the irreplaceable heirloom. "A gift from a grateful board," Liz murmured, the heavy velvet feeling like a comforting layer of armor. "Let's call it the quiet capital piece." Meanwhile, 2 blocks away, chaos was brewing in Gregory and Chloe's meticulously staged, heavily indebted home. Chloe, dressed in a tight, sequined gold dress for the founder's mixer, was pacing the marble entryway while Greg frantically checked his phone. "It doesn't make any sense, Greg. Alistair Cross's assistant just called our catering service. asking about a menu change at the Columbia Tower Gala. Why would they be interested in their menu? Chloe hissed, her voice strained with mounting panic. Greg ran a hand through his hair, sweat dampening his brow despite the cool air conditioning. I don't know, Chloe, but I got the same notification. Mrs. Vance's RSVP was just quietly retracted from our list. The note says, unavoidable prior commitment with a major PNW investor. What major investor? Everyone who matters is coming to our mixer. Chloe stopped pacing abruptly, her eyes wide with sudden, dreadful realization. The presentation, Greg. Cross and Vance were your only targets. They are the only people who know your pitch and have the liquidity for a seed round. If they aren't here, this whole event is just a party for glorified middle managers. We spent $15,000 on this. We borrowed against the house to cover the liquor bill. I know, Greg shouted, kicking a designer throw pillow. But why? Why would they bail on us tonight? They promised Chloe's father they would be here. He grabbed his laptop, frantic, and pulled up the event website for the Columbia Tower Club, their city's most prestigious venue. The site proudly displayed a banner for the Pacific Northwest Investment Gala, and a small, newly added press release was at the top. Honoring the silent architects of tech, Elizabeth Henderson to keynote. Greg read the name, then blinked, rubbing his eyes violently. No, that can't be right. Elizabeth Henderson? That's a common name, Chloe. It must be someone else. Chloe leaned over his shoulder, reading the accompanying paragraph that detailed the gala's focus on honoring the few, quiet founders who built the foundations of the modern tech boom. A prominent, yet discreet black and white image of a younger woman, undeniably Liz's features but sharp and powerful, was next to the text. The article referenced her role in the founding of 3 major firms and her current function as the managing partner of the global Quiet Capital Investment Trust. Greg, Chloe whispered, her voice a thin, shaky sound. Greg, your mother's name is Elizabeth Henderson. And Quiet Capital. Didn't she always call her little savings account my quiet fund? Greg stared at the screen, his face draining of color. The reality of his financial precipice suddenly deepened into an abyss of incomprehensible familial deceit. No, she can't be. She drives that 10-year-old Camry. She asked me to pick up metal chairs. She gives us $500 to help with the water bill. His voice was laced with frantic denial. The chairs, Greg, Chloe said, clutching his arm so hard her nails dug into his skin. She made you come over yesterday for the chairs. She asked you to think about selling the house. She was laughing at us. She's been mocking us for years. Just then, Greg's personal email pinged. It was an anonymous notification from his mortgage broker. The email was terse and bureaucratic. Account update. The outstanding balance on your 3rd mortgage line, including all accrued interest and penalty fees, has been transferred to a new private holding company. New ownership will be contacting you shortly with new terms. For all inquiries regarding the principal balance of $485,000, please contact the legal representative of Quiet Capital Trust. Greg dropped the laptop. It clattered to the floor, the screen cracking. The weight of the world, which had been pressing on him for years, had suddenly intensified 1,000-fold. The $485,000, the exact number of his consumer debt, and the name Quiet Capital. The $500 she sends us, Greg said, his voice flat with horror. It wasn't a contribution, Chloe, it was a joke. It was her tithe to the joke we were making of our lives. Chloe looked around their expensive, empty living room, the space designed only for appearance. The founders' mixer was set to begin in an hour, but the founders they needed were gone, drawn away by a social gravitational force they didn't know existed. They were financially exposed, socially irrelevant, and the source of their collapse was not an outside competitor but the poor, simple woman they had humiliated for years. In her small ranch house, Liz heard a car pull up. It was not the familiar heavy thump of Greg's Audi, but the quiet, imposing swoosh of a high-end, professionally driven vehicle. Ethan Hale, her security consultant and escort, opened the back door of a sleek black Rolls-Royce Ghost. Liz stepped out onto her worn, cracked driveway. The midnight blue velvet gown shimmered, and the emerald at her neck caught the last rays of the setting sun. She looked back at her simple house, a museum of her old life, before turning decisively toward the waiting car. We have a keynote to deliver. Mr. Hale, Liz said, her voice the clear, authoritative voice of the powerful, successful woman she had always been, and an audience who needs a very public reminder of who actually controls the capital in this city. Pulled out her simple wallet, the one she intentionally kept thin and old, and retrieved the 3 $20 bills and 7 ones inside. She pulled out her phone, opened her secure banking app, and with a single, quick motion, transferred $485,000 now, the exact sum of Greg and Chloe's accumulated consumer debt, into a newly established, anonymous escrow account under her sole control. She looked at the sum, a mere flicker in her overall balance. "You said you want to simplify, Gregory," she thought, a new sharp light in her eyes. "I am simplifying your life, starting with the burden of your debt, but not in the way you think." On Saturday, when Greg and Chloe realized that their key investors were missing and their financial future was collapsing, Liz would finally reveal the true cost of their arrogance. She was not a struggling mother looking for a condo. She was the woman who built the tower they sought to climb, and she was about to pull the rug out from under their feet, making them fall exactly 485,000 reasons deep. The stage was set, the audience was distracted, and the star was about to make her grand, unexpected entrance. The air inside Gregory and Chloe's meticulously decorated home grew heavy with the smell of expensive anxiety. The founder's mixer, which was supposed to be a triumph, the moment Greg secured the funding to stabilize their life, had instantly become a disastrous failure. The room was populated by about 30 people, mostly acquaintances and small-time consultants, all dressed in formal attire that suddenly felt ridiculously overdressed for the occasion. The only people with real capital, the 2 key venture capitalists, Alistair Cross and Eleanor Vance, were conspicuously absent. Chloe, usually a beacon of brittle composure, was trembling. Her sequined gold dress felt less like an asset and more like a sign reading, "We're desperate." She gripped Greg's elbow, her eyes constantly darting to the empty spot near the artisanal cheese board where Cross and Vance were meant to stand. "Smile, Greg, smile," she hissed through a rigidly fixed grin. "Pretend you just closed a massive deal. Maybe they're just running late. Maybe the traffic is impossible." Greg knew better. The email about the mortgage line transfer, the name Quiet Capital, and the simultaneous news of his mother, Elizabeth Henderson, headlining the city's most prestigious financial gala. It all coalesced into a single, terrifying truth. His mother hadn't just removed the lifeline. She had systematically stolen the air from the room he was breathing in. He tried to engage a small group of junior partners, but his voice cracked when he mentioned the pivotal strategic shift of his company. His eyes kept sweeping past the window, expecting a process server, or worse, his mother's frail, judgmental face to appear at the door. He felt a deep, humiliating vulnerability, realizing every guest here, many of whom he considered beneath him, was now a witness to his professional and financial exposure. "Greg, I'm sorry, I have to go," said one of the few higher-profile guests, a woman who owned a successful local bakery chain. "My husband just texted. Apparently, everyone is heading downtown to the Columbia Tower Club. I hear they have secured a surprise keynote speaker, a total ghost, someone from the original tech boom. You know how it is. We can't afford to miss networking opportunities like that." One by one, guests began to subtly, or not so subtly, excuse themselves. The promise of genuine top-tier networking at the Pacific Northwest Investment Gala was a far stronger pull than the strained, uncomfortable atmosphere of the Henderson mixer, the sight of Greg's overextended liquor display, and untouched presentation. Slides became symbols of a party that had lost its purpose. Within 45 minutes, the crowd had dwindled to 10 people, 2 caterers, the bartender, 4 family friends who felt too awkward to leave, and Chloe and Greg. Chloe burst into tears, the sudden, theatrical kind of weeping that was more about her ruined evening than real grief. "Our entire savings, Greg, the 3rd mortgage, for nothing. And your mother. She's there! She's the ghost! She's doing this." Greg, however, felt a cold, quiet realization dawning. He didn't see a poor woman playing a cruel trick. He saw a powerful, formidable opponent who had been in control of the chessboard the entire time. "No, Chloe," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "She isn't doing this to us. She's doing this to you, and maybe to the person I've become because of you. He picked up his shattered laptop, his own presentation now utterly meaningless. The fight had shifted from one of ambition to one of survival. Meanwhile, across town, at the pinnacle of the city's financial district, the Pacific Northwest Investment Gala was a spectacular symphony of wealth and power. The Columbia Tower Club's ballroom, with its sweeping views of Puget Sound, pulsed with the quiet energy of serious money. The crowd was a collection of executives, venture capitalists, and financiers, the very people who had just abandoned the Henderson mixer. The grandest moment was reserved for the entrance of the keynote speaker. At 8:30 p.m., the ballroom doors opened. A momentary hush fell over the assembled crowd, a rare event in such a high-volume setting. Liz did not rush. She entered slowly, escorted by the formidable Ethan Hale, whose presence alone commanded attention. The transformation was absolute. The simple, frail mother was gone. In her place was Elizabeth Henderson, the architect of quiet capital. The midnight blue velvet gown caught the ambient light, giving her a regal, almost intimidating silhouette. The emerald pendant was not merely jewelry. It was a punctuation mark, a single, undeniable flash of generational wealth. Whispers immediately began to ripple through the room. Is that Elizabeth Henderson? I thought she retired decades ago. They said she was a recluse. Look at the emerald. That piece hasn't been seen publicly in 20 years. Alistair Cross, the venture capitalist Greg had desperately sought, immediately abandoned his conversation and rushed over, followed closely by Eleanor Vance. Elizabeth, my God, it is you, Cross exclaimed, his voice reverent. Alistair Cross, Quiet Capital. It is an immense honor. Your appearance tonight is the talk of the entire financial press. We haven't seen you since the IPO of MedTech. Liz offered a cool, perfectly calibrated smile. She did not extend a hand for a handshake, forcing Cross and Vance to simply nod in deference. Mr. Cross, Mrs. Vance, how nice of you to prioritize this event. I understand you had a prior engagement planned this evening. Cross, a man who rarely looked flustered, actually flushed slightly. Oh, that minor suburban dinner? Nothing, absolutely nothing compared to this, Elizabeth. An old favor to a colleague. We rescheduled immediately. We simply could not miss hearing you speak on the future of private equity. That is where the real money is, after all. The words, minor suburban dinner, were an unintentional but perfect dagger plunged into the heart of Greg and Chloe's ruined evening. Liz simply nodded, accepting the flattery and the implicit betrayal of her son without a flicker of emotion. She was led to the podium. The introduction by the gala host was a breathless recitation of her financial legacy, a testament to her brilliance, her secrecy, and the immense quiet influence she wielded over the Pacific Northwest economy. Liz stepped up to the microphone. The room was silent, entirely captivated. She looked out at the glittering sea of power brokers, her eyes sharp and assessing. She was delivering a keynote speech, but it was also a statement, a highly public, undeniable declaration of war on the presumption and entitlement that had poisoned her family. Good evening, Liz began, her voice resonating with power, the reedy softness completely gone. I am Elizabeth Henderson, and tonight I will not be speaking about the future of capital. I will be speaking about the cost of dignity. Her first words were a seismic shock. Every attendee leaned in, instantly recognizing that this speech would be more than just financial commentary. It would be a profound personal lesson delivered from the very top of the financial food chain. The revenge was now public, undeniable, and broadcast to the entire city. Elizabeth Henderson stood at the podium in the Columbia Tower Club, bathed in the glow of the city lights reflecting off the vast windows. The ballroom was silent, a rare tribute paid to genuine, unassailable power. She had the full attention of Seattle's financial elite, but her words were directed only at the ghost of her son and daughter-in-law, whose own failed party was happening miles away. I am Elizabeth Henderson, and tonight I will not be speaking about the future of capital. I will be speaking about the cost of dignity, Liz repeated, letting the phrase settle over the crowd. She began by speaking about the concept of quiet capital, the term she had used for years. In finance, We celebrate the loud, the disruptors, the companies that burn bright and fast," she stated, her voice calm and authoritative. "But the real, lasting wealth, the generational capital, is always quiet. It's the money that stays invested, that pays no attention to fleeting trends. It's the foundation built on discipline, patience, and deliberate scarcity." She paused, making eye contact with Alistair Cross and Eleanor Vance, the investors who had abandoned Greg's mixer for her. "I spent 20 years building wealth, and I spent 20 years living simply. I was mocked for it. I was dismissed for it. I was treated as a liability by those who presumed they had a right to my resources. They saw my simplicity not as a strength, but as a weakness, an invitation to entitlement." The crowd murmured, sensing the deeply personal nature of her speech. They were hearing a legend articulate a fundamental truth of the old guard, the difference between inherited entitlement and self-made worth. "This leads me to the cost," Liz continued, her gaze hardening slightly. "What is the cost of presuming that your lifestyle is owed to you? What is the cost of looking at an older woman, your mother, your mother-in-law, and seeing not a person but an ATM? The cost is not measured in dollars, but in the irrevocable loss of self-respect." She then pivoted, her speech shifting from the abstract to a chilling, specific example. "Just this week, I was approached by a younger family, a son and his wife, who were facing financial collapse. They lived beyond their means, built a life on debt, and expected a bailout. They asked me to sell my humble home, the last asset they believed I had, to save their third mortgage. They called this simplifying my life. They even condescended to ask me to move their folding chairs and demanded a paltry sum of $500, which they claimed was for their water bill, to cover the interest on their overextended luxury credit cards." Wave of shocked silence swept through the ballroom. The details were too specific, too raw to be merely hypothetical. "Today I want to assure you," Liz declared, her voice ringing with finality, "I did not sell my home. My humble home, by the way, sits on a land parcel purchased in 1995 that is now assessed at 8 figures and is held in a trust controlled by the very same quiet capital I manage. It is not an asset I am forced to liquidate. It is the foundation of my security." She held up a small, elegant phone. "And the cost of their entitlement? That cost is their entire financial structure. This afternoon, I anonymously paid off the total consumer debt of $485,000 for that family. I did not do this to save them. I did this to remove their excuses. I transferred the ownership of their third mortgage to Quiet Capital, and I ensured that their key investors were otherwise engaged tonight." The revelation was met not with gasps, but with slow, respectful nods. The elite understood. Liz had not simply disowned them. She had surgically removed their ability to manipulate. She had given them the financial clean slate they craved, but tied it to a single, powerful hand, hers, ensuring they had nowhere left to hide. They wanted to simplify their lives, Liz concluded, a faint, chilling smile gracing her lips. Now they have nothing left but the truth. The cost of dignity is often the loss of everything built upon a lie. She ended her speech, and the room erupted in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes, a tribute not just to her financial success, but to the cold, masterful execution of her personal justice. At that very moment, in their suburban home, Greg and Chloe stood paralyzed, staring at the shattered laptop screen. The news from the gala was already spreading like wildfire on financial blogs and social media. Liz's speech was being live quoted. Chloe, finally processing the total collapse, sank onto an expensive, empty couch. "She bought our debt, Greg. She owns us. We can't file for bankruptcy. She's the creditor." Greg, however, walked slowly to the small, dark home office he rarely used. He sat down at the inherited desk. The full weight of his decade of entitlement crashed down on him. He hadn't just been disrespectful. He had been a fool. He had mocked the very woman who could have given him the world, all because he judged her by the age of her coat and the simplicity of her house. He pulled open the center drawer and found a stack of old letters from his father, George. He picked up one, dated 2 months before his father's death. "Your mother, Greg, is the smartest person I've ever known. She is also the most private, She carries an empire on her shoulders, but she chooses to live humbly to teach you that your character is your greatest asset, not your balance sheet. Never forget that. And never take her kindness for weakness. If you ever do, you will find out that Liz Henderson plays a very long game. Greg looked at the letter, then at the notification on his phone. The game was over. He had lost everything his false life was built on. He had gained a valuable, devastating lesson. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. The text was short, clear, and absolutely final. From Quiet Capital, subject, your new terms. The $485,000 in consumer debt is cleared. You are debt-free. Your mortgage is now held by Quiet Capital. Your new monthly payment, $500. The payment is due on the 1st of every month, no grace period. Failure to pay will result in immediate foreclosure. The first payment is due tomorrow. Liz hadn't demanded the principal. She had simply turned the $500 they had been stealing from her into the exact instrument of their control. They were now paying their mother the same amount they had mocked her for. But this time, it was to keep the roof over their heads. Greg stood up, walked to the kitchen, and looked out the window at the familiar, unassuming silhouette of his mother's house in the distance. He knew with absolute certainty that he was utterly powerless. The ultimate revenge was not ruin, but absolute, inescapable dependency on the very person they had dismissed. The silence in Greg and Chloe's expensive home was heavier than any argument. The caterers had quietly packed up their unused hors d'oeuvres and left. Chloe was still crying, but her tears were now born of pure financial terror, not performative distress. She sat huddled on the couch, surrounded by the wreckage of their failed social climb. Greg, standing in the kitchen, felt a profound, unnerving clarity. The mask of entitlement had been violently ripped away, leaving only the weak, scared man beneath. He looked at the text message displaying the new mortgage terms, $500 due on the 1st, no grace period, and understood the true nature of his mother's power. It wasn't about the millions she controlled. It was about the absolute control she had established over their basic needs. The next morning, Greg awoke before dawn. Chloe was still asleep, exhausted by her emotional collapse. He retrieved the old letters from his father, put on the least expensive, least pretentious shirt he owned, and quietly drove the short distance to his mother's house. He didn't pull into the driveway. He parked on the street and walked up the cracked pavement. He noticed for the first time the meticulous order of her garden and the quality of the solid oak front door that had always looked merely old to him. He knocked, and Liz opened the door immediately. She was dressed in comfortable linen trousers and a soft cashmere sweater, the attire of a woman who values quality over brand, comfort over flash. Her silver hair was still styled from the gala, giving her a permanent air of refined authority. "Good morning, Gregory," Liz said, her voice completely devoid of the usual feigned frailty, yet not unkind. "I was expecting you." "Mom," Greg managed, his voice thick with shame. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. We were terrible. I was blind." Liz stepped back, inviting him in. The living room, which had seemed so pathetic and shabby yesterday, now felt deliberately peaceful and genuine. The old furniture wasn't shabby, it was enduring. "No, sorry doesn't cover it, Gregory," Liz confirmed, walking past him into the kitchen. "You didn't just borrow money, you borrowed my trust and my dignity. That has a cost that can't be paid with a dollar amount." She sat down at the oak table, motioning for him to join her. He sat tentatively, clutching his father's letters. "I called Michael Chen early this morning," Liz stated, immediately cutting through the emotion. "The $485,000 in consumer debt is cleared. You are debt-free. That was the gift to clear the deck. But the mortgage terms are non-negotiable. You will pay the $500 on the 1st, or you lose the house. That is the discipline you need to learn. It is the real cost of your arrogance." Greg swallowed hard. "I understand. I won't miss a payment. But Mom, why? Why all the secrecy? Why live like this?" Liz looked at him, her eyes softening slightly. "For 20 years I watched money destroy families, Gregory. I saw what happened when children knew they had an endless safety net. I wanted you to build a life based on your own worth, not on my balance sheet. I wanted you to learn how to work for something, not expect something. When you met Chloe, I saw that lesson being completely forgotten. She married the idea of wealth, and you became addicted to her ambition. She nodded toward the letters in his hand. Your father knew. He knew the only way to save you from a life of pretense was to let you hit rock bottom on your own terms. I simply accelerated the timeline and made the landing extremely public. Greg laid the letters on the table. I read these. He said I shouldn't take your kindness for weakness. He warned me. He did, Liz said simply. But now we move forward. Chloe's boutique consulting firm is under investigation for vendor payments. Since her firm has no tangible assets, she's facing personal liability. However, Quiet Capital is a substantial financial entity. If Chloe agrees to dissolve her firm entirely and take an entry-level administrative position at a community nonprofit, a job where her salary is low, but she has absolutely no control over large sums of money, I can quietly absorb the bulk of her corporate debt as a loss against my capital gains. Greg looked horrified. You want her to work at a nonprofit? She'll never agree to that, Mom. That's humiliation. It is a consequence, Liz corrected firmly. It is the choice between having a roof over her head, even one I control, or filing for personal bankruptcy while fighting the IRS. If she wants to stay in my house with my son, she will learn what it means to work for something meaningful, not just material. She stood up, signifying the end of the conversation. You need to decide, Gregory. Do you want the life you built on debt and illusion, or the life that is honest, even if it is simple? The only wealth you have now is the roof over your head, and the only credit you have is with me. That $500 is your repentance. Greg stood, straightened his shoulders, and finally met his mother's gaze with genuine respect. I choose the truth, Mom. I'll make the payment tomorrow. The aftermath was swift and final. Chloe initially exploded in a rage of denial and entitlement, but when faced with the cold, hard facts that her mother-in-law was now her sole creditor, holding absolute power over her home, she crumbled. Within 2 weeks, she dissolved her firm and, with bitter resignation, took the low-paying administrative job. The designer clothes and unnecessary gadgets were sold off to maintain the new disciplined budget. Liz, having revealed her identity, stepped back into her role as the silent titan of the Northwest. She returned to her Quiet Capital offices, though she still drove the old Camry and still chose to live in the simple ranch house. The only change was the addition of the emerald necklace, which she sometimes wore, not as an ornament, but as a subtle reminder of the power of her patience. Gregory, stripped of his pretense, began working harder and more honestly at his job. He visited his mother weekly, not to ask for money, but to genuinely spend time with her. He was finally seeing her, not as a liability, but as a legacy. The old photo of the gap-toothed muddy boy slowly began to align with the man he was forced to become. The ultimate revenge was not the ruin of their finances, but the reconstruction of their character. Liz had not lost a son. She had regained a man, forced to live a life of true simplicity, now utterly dependent on the benevolent, quiet power of the mother he once scorned. The house was controlled by Quiet Capital, and the family was controlled by Elizabeth Henderson. The reckoning was complete.